I never thought my own engagement ring would feel like a weight on my finger, but that's what happens when your fiancé leaves you for someone with a fake fortune. I caught Elias and Vivian at our special cafe, heads bent together like conspirators. Sometimes the heart chooses what the mind never considered possible, he told me, as if reading from a script. 5 years of supporting his dreams meant nothing compared to the connections her family name could bring him. The final blow came when their engagement announcement arrived in my mailbox, scheduled exactly 1 year from what would have been our wedding day. I should have broken completely. Instead, I noticed the flaws in his architectural designs that night, mistakes that could ruin everything he was building. That was when I decided. He left me for her empty fortune, but in the end, I would be the one signing all his work. My name is Zarina. For 5 years, I was the woman behind Elias Harrington's rising star in architecture. I believed in his talent with unwavering conviction, sometimes more than he believed in himself. Our life together had a comfortable rhythm. I cooked elaborate meals in our seaside apartment while he sketched until dawn. The sound of his pencil against paper was the soundtrack of our evenings, and the sight of him lost in his creative world made my heart swell with pride. When his firm invited him to rowing competitions to network with potential clients, I was there cheering from the sidelines, making conversation with partners and investors while he caught his breath between races. I postponed applying for a management position at my design consultancy firm when he needed help building connections. Just until the Westbrook project is finished, he'd promised. That was 2 years ago. None of that felt like sacrifice at the time. It felt like investment. In us, in our future. The diamond on my finger caught the light as I stirred homemade bouillabaisse, our anniversary dinner that took 3 hours to prepare. The ring was a promise of our Santorini wedding, just 6 months away. I had already chosen white lilies and blue hydrangeas to match the Grecian sea. My dress hung in the spare room closet, hidden beneath a garment bag he promised not to peek at. I lit candles and poured wine, expecting Elias home by 7. At 8, I sent a text. At 9, the bouillabaisse had congealed into an unappetizing mess, and the candles had burned low. When he finally arrived at 10:30, he barely glanced at the romantic setup. "Sorry, got caught up with a potential investor," he said, loosening his tie and grabbing a beer from the refrigerator instead of the wine I'd poured. Should have texted. "It's our anniversary," I said, trying to keep my voice light. 5 years together deserves at least a text, don't you think? He looked genuinely surprised, then chagrined. "Is that today? I thought it was next week." "God. I'm sorry, Zarina." He kissed my forehead distractedly. This potential backer could change everything for us, though. The Caldwells have connections to every major architectural client in the Northeast. "The Caldwells?" I asked, clearing the untouched plates. "As in Vivian Caldwell's family?" "Yes, actually. How did you know?" His phone buzzed, and he checked it immediately, his expression shifting between excitement and something else, something that made my stomach knot. "You mentioned her before, your childhood friend who moved here recently." Right. He tapped out a response, not looking at me. "She's been incredible, connecting me with her family's network. This could be the break we've been waiting for." I said nothing about how he suddenly used "we" when discussing his career opportunities, but had been saying, "I need space to work," for the past 3 months. I pretended not to notice how he took his phone into the bathroom when he showered or how he changed his password after 5 years of sharing it with me. The hotel charges appeared on our shared credit card statement 2 weeks later. The Archer Hotel downtown, 3 Tuesdays in a row. When I asked about them, Elias had explanations ready. "Client meetings run late. It doesn't make sense to drive all the way back just to come downtown again the next morning." His answers were reasonable, rehearsed. "The firm reimburses me. Anyway, you don't need to worry about it." I wanted to believe him. But the distance between us grew, marked by late nights and weekends spent at the office, forgotten dinner plans, and a coldness in our bed that no amount of reaching out could warm. His complaints about our life together became more frequent. Our apartment was too far from downtown. My cooking was too elaborate when he just wanted something quick. My job didn't connect us to the right people. Vivian suggested I look at lofts in the Arts District, he said one morning, scrolling through real estate listings over coffee. Better for hosting the kind of industry events that could elevate my profile. We chose this place together, I reminded him, for the ocean view, for the sunrise. That was before I understood what it takes to really succeed in this industry. He didn't look up from his phone. Perception matters. Location matters. I swallowed the hurt and focused on the wedding plans. If we were just going through a rough patch, the wedding would bring us back together. I ordered sample invitations and created mood boards for the reception. I left them on the dining table with little notes asking for his input. They remained untouched for days until he finally said, "Just decide whatever you want. I trust your taste." The words should have been a compliment, but they felt like dismissal. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I'd taken a half day off work to finalize our wedding photographer contract, but the photographer canceled last minute. Instead of going home to an empty apartment, I decided to surprise Elias with coffee at his office. He wasn't there. His assistant looked uncomfortable when I asked for him. "I thought he had a personal day today," she said, not meeting my eyes. Something about meeting clients elsewhere? An instinct I'd been suppressing for months pushed me toward Café Lumière, our special place where we'd had our first date. The place he claimed to often meet clients for its neutral, creative atmosphere. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw them, Elias and Vivian Caldwell, sitting at our corner table. Her hand was stretched across the table, not quite touching his, but the intimacy in their posture excluded everyone else in the crowded cafe. Her head was thrown back in laughter at something he said, her long neck exposed. He was leaning forward, watching her with an intensity I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Neither of them noticed me standing outside in the rain, watching my world collapse through a pane of glass. I stood frozen in the rain for several minutes, watching them. Vivian touched Elias's arm, leaning in closer to whisper something that made him smile. That smile, the one that once made my heart race, now felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My clothes were soaked through by the time I pushed open the cafe door, the little bell announcing my arrival. Their heads turned simultaneously. The look on Elias's face shifted from shock to guilt, to something that looked almost like relief. Vivian, however, showed only mild surprise, as if my appearance was merely an unexpected inconvenience. "Zarina," Elias said, standing awkwardly. "What are you doing here?" The question itself was an admission. If this had been an innocent meeting, he would have said, "This is a nice surprise," or "Come join us." Instead, his tone carried the unmistakable edge of someone caught in the act. "I was going to ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your assistant said you took a personal day." Vivian smiled at me with perfect white teeth. "Elias has been helping me understand the local architectural landscape. My family is considering several investment opportunities." She was beautiful, in a polished, deliberate way, expensively highlighted hair, a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, subtle jewelry that whispered old money. She belonged to a world Elias had always secretly coveted, where connections mattered more than talent, where doors opened based on your last name rather than your portfolio. "We should talk privately," Elias said to me, then turned to Vivian. "I'll call you later." She gathered her things unhurriedly. "Take your time. Daddy's dinner with the Vandermeer group isn't until Thursday." The casual mention of influential developers was not accidental. She brushed past me with a gentle squeeze of my arm that felt like ownership, not compassion. When she left, Elias and I sat across from each other at the table where we'd once shared dreams over coffee. "How long?" I asked. "It's not what you think," he began, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. "Vivian and I have a history. We grew up together in Connecticut. When she moved here, we reconnected. It started professionally. And now?" He sighed, running his hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. "Sometimes the heart chooses what the mind never considered possible," he said, as if reading from a screenplay. The rehearsed quality of his words told me he'd been preparing this speech. "Are you leaving me for her?" My voice cracked despite my efforts to remain composed. "This isn't just about feelings, Zarina. This is about my future." Our relationship has been holding me back professionally. The cruelty of his statement hung in the air between us. Vivian's family has connections to exclusive architectural clients and the financial backing to launch my dream firm. So, this is a business decision? I whispered. Don't reduce it to that. We've grown apart. You must have felt it too. He reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled away. You're amazing, but you want different things. You're content with our comfortable life. I need more. More than 5 years together? More than our wedding in 6 months? He looked away. I should have told you sooner. I just didn't know how. That night, he packed his essential belongings while I sat motionless on our bed. He moved methodically around the apartment, selecting what he deemed important enough to take immediately. His favorite books, his expensive drafting tools, the watch I'd saved for a year to buy him. I'll come back for the rest later, he said, standing at the door with 2 suitcases. You can stay here until the lease ends in 3 months. I'll keep paying my share. His generosity felt like another insult. Where will you go? Vivian has a guest apartment in her family's building downtown, just until I find my own place. The lie was transparent. He had no intention of finding his own place. After he left, I discovered what he'd deemed unimportant enough to leave behind. Drafts and sketches from earlier projects, a half-empty bottle of cologne I'd given him for his birthday, the framed photo of us in Barcelona, relics of a life he was already forgetting. The days that followed blurred together. I called in sick to work, claiming a severe flu. I ignored texts from friends asking why Elias had suddenly changed his relationship status online. I ordered takeout I couldn't eat and watched mindless television until dawn. 1 week after he left, his assistant called to ask if I could bring some files he'd left behind to the office. I agreed, thinking it might provide closure to see him in his professional setting, to remind myself that he was just a man, not the center of my universe. When I arrived clutching the portfolio he'd requested, his office door was closed. Through the glass wall I could see him and Vivian, her perched casually on the edge of his desk, him showing her something on his computer screen. They looked right together, both tall, polished, ambitious. She belonged in his sleek, modern office in a way I never had. His assistant noticed me watching them. They've been inseparable, she said with forced cheerfulness. The Caldwells have already introduced him to the Vandermeer Group. He might get the Downtown Arts Complex project. I handed her the portfolio without responding and walked out. For the next month, I watched their relationship unfold through social media, unable to stop myself from looking. Elias and Vivian at gallery openings. Elias and Vivian at a fundraising gala. Elias being introduced to influential people by Vivian's father, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and an air of authority. Friends stopped calling. Industry acquaintances who had once praised my supporting role in Elias's success now barely acknowledged me at events I forced myself to attend. The whispers followed me. Poor Zarina, replaced by someone better connected, more suitable. The final devastation arrived in an elegant cream envelope 3 months after he left. Their engagement announcement, addressed to me as if by clerical error, scheduled exactly 1 year from what would have been our wedding day. The invitation included a note in Vivian's flowing handwriting. We hope you understand that some things are simply meant to be. I sat on the kitchen floor, the invitation clutched in my shaking hands, and allowed myself to feel the full measure of the humiliation. They hadn't even waited a respectable amount of time. They had chosen our date, the date I had dreamed about, planned for, saved for. That night, I opened a bottle of wine and contemplated my options. I could call Elias and scream at him for his cruelty. I could show up at one of their social events and create a scene. I could post the truth on social media for everyone to see. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in months. I looked through the wedding planning materials I'd kept in a box under the bed. As I flipped through fabric swatches and venue photos, a separate portfolio fell out, one of Elias's old design collections he hadn't bothered to take. Through tear-blurred eyes, I began sorting through the papers, a last act of devotion to the man who had discarded me. My fingers traced the elegant lines of his drawings, remembering how proud I'd been of his talent. That's when I saw it. A miscalculation in the load-bearing support structure of his most celebrated design, the one that had first brought him industry attention. It wasn't immediately obvious, but my years working adjacent to architecture had taught me enough to recognize the flaw. Further examination revealed similar subtle errors in other projects, mistakes that could eventually compromise client safety. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of broken promises and flawed designs, something inside me hardened. The woman who had lived to support Elias Harrington died that night. In her place, someone new emerged, someone with purpose beyond devotion to a man who had never deserved it. I became a ghost haunting the spaces of my former life. The apartment felt both emptier without Elias and somehow more crowded with his absence. Every corner held memories that whispered of betrayal. I called in sick to work so often that my supervisor finally suggested I take personal leave. "To sort things out," she said gently. "We all know what happened with Elias. Take the time you need." That was humiliation in its purest form, the realization that my private heartbreak had become office gossip. I accepted the leave, not because I needed time to heal, but because I couldn't bear the pitying glances from colleagues who had seen the engagement announcement or heard through industry channels about Elias's meteoric rise with the Caldwells. Backing. I lost weight without trying. Food tasted like ash, and sleep became an elusive luxury. When I did sleep, I dreamed of Vivian and Elias laughing at me, their voices echoing in marble hallways I could never access. I avoided social media but couldn't stop myself from occasionally checking their profiles. Each new photo was another cut. Elias in a tuxedo at a charity gala, his arm around Vivian's slim waist, Vivian's father introducing Elias to the mayor at a groundbreaking ceremony. The announcement that Elias had secured the Downtown Arts Complex project, the one he'd dreamed about for years. My friends tried at first. They invited me to dinners I couldn't afford, or suggested nights out where I might meet someone new, as if replacing Elias was as simple as changing a light bulb. But my silence and cancellations eventually discouraged them. The invitations grew less frequent, then stopped altogether. I recognized myself less and less in the mirror, hollow-eyed, sharp-cheeked, a stranger wearing my skin. The diamond ring still sat in its velvet box on my dresser. I couldn't bring myself to sell it or throw it away. It represented a future that had been stolen from me through lies and manipulation. But it was also the last tangible proof that someone had once promised me forever. One night, exactly 1 month after receiving their engagement announcement, I found myself sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by the wedding planning materials I'd kept in a box under the bed. The bottle of wine beside me was almost empty, and tears blurred my vision as I flipped through fabric swatches and venue photos. "Pathetic," I whispered to myself, throwing a sample invitation into the trash can I'd positioned nearby. It missed, landing beside a stack of Elias's old design portfolios, the ones he hadn't considered important enough to take. I reached for the portfolio, running my fingers over his name embossed on the cover. Inside were early drafts of the projects that had launched his career, complete with his handwritten notes in the margins. I'd always loved his handwriting, architectural, even in its formation, precise and balanced. Through my tears, I began organizing the papers, a final act of devotion to the man who had discarded me. I sorted chronologically, remembering the late nights when I'd brought him coffee while he worked on these very drawings. Remembering how I'd believed in his talent, sometimes more than he believed in himself. As I arranged the blueprint for the Kendall Museum extension, the project that had first brought him industry attention, something caught my eye. A miscalculation in the load-bearing support structure. It wasn't immediately obvious, but my years working adjacent to architecture had taught me enough to recognize the flaw. The column thickness he'd specified wouldn't adequately support the cantilevered section of the building, not with the materials he'd chosen. I sat up straighter, wine forgotten, and examined the drawing more carefully. The error was subtle but potentially catastrophic. If constructed exactly as designed, the structure would appear stable initially but could develop serious problems over time. With growing concentration, I pulled out more of his designs. The Riverfront Plaza, the Westbrook corporate headquarters, the luxury condominium project that had earned him his first award. In each one, I found similar subtle flaws, a miscalculated load distribution here, an inadequate foundation element there, structural supports that wouldn't meet code requirements in severe weather conditions. How had no one caught these? Then I remembered, Elias always submitted his final designs after extensive revisions with senior architects at his firm. These were his personal drafts, the ones he kept for his portfolio. The mistakes would have been corrected in the official submissions. But what about his new projects? The ones he was developing for his own firm, backed by the Caldwells? Would anyone be checking his work with the same rigor? Or would they trust his growing reputation, his apparent brilliance? In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of broken promises and flawed designs, something inside me hardened. The woman who had lived to support Elias Harrington died that night. In her place, someone new emerged. Someone with purpose beyond devotion to a man who had never deserved it. I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting on the floor for hours, and walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over the ocean, painting the water with streaks of gold and pink. For the first time in months, I felt fully awake, fully present. Enough, I said to the empty apartment. Enough self-pity. That morning, I showered for longer than my usual rushed rinse. I blow-dried my hair. I put on makeup for the first time since Elias left. I selected clothes that fit my thinner frame. A black pencil skirt and a crisp white blouse I'd bought but never worn because Elias had said it made me look too corporate. I called my supervisor and told her I was ready to return to work. "Are you sure?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "It's only been a month." "I'm sure," I replied. "I've had enough time to think about what I want." What I wanted was crystal clear now. Not revenge in the traditional sense, but something more substantial, more permanent. I wanted to reclaim myself from the ashes of the relationship that had consumed me. I wanted to build something on the ruins, not just move on, but emerge transformed. I made a list of what I needed to do. First, professionalizing my knowledge. I had absorbed enough architectural principles over the years to recognize flaws, but I needed more formal understanding. Second, reconnecting with my own professional network, the one I'd neglected while focusing on Elias's career. Third, gathering information about the Caldwells and their supposed fortune. That evening, I enrolled in an online architectural compliance certification course. It wasn't a degree, but it would give me credibility in discussions about structural integrity and building codes. I paid for it with the money I'd been saving for honeymoon excursions in Santorini. The next day at work, I requested a transfer to our firm's compliance division. My supervisor was surprised but supportive. "It's less creative than your current role," she warned. "More technical, more about regulations and specifications." "That's exactly what I want," I told her. "I need something precise, something with clear rules." Over the next 2 weeks, I immersed myself in learning building codes and compliance regulations. I stayed late at the office, reading industry journals and technical manuals. I volunteered for projects that would expand my knowledge base. My colleagues noticed the change, commenting on my renewed focus and energy. No one mentioned Elias anymore. At night, I researched the Caldwells. Information wasn't hard to find, once I knew where to look. Society pages showed them at exclusive events. Business journals mentioned Howard Caldwell's investment ventures. But there were inconsistencies. Properties they claimed to own that had different names on public records. Business partnerships that dissolved under mysterious circumstances. Lawsuits settled quietly out of court. I started keeping a digital file of my findings, organized methodically. Vivian's family had mastered the art of appearing wealthy while dodging creditors. They moved in elite circles but always managed to be between properties. Their promised investment in Elias's firm existed only in conversation, never in contracts. He was building his dreams on their empty promises, too blinded by ambition and infatuation to see the truth. 1 month into my new routine, I received another envelope with the familiar Caldwell family crest embossed on the back. Inside was an invitation to an industry gala celebrating the groundbreaking of the downtown arts complex. My name was printed on the envelope, a courtesy inclusion for someone no longer relevant to their world. I placed the invitation on my refrigerator with a magnet, not as a reminder of my pain, but as a target, a deadline for becoming someone they would regret underestimating. Watch me, I whispered to the empty kitchen. Just watch what happens. Next. I began methodically rebuilding myself and gathering information. My compliance certification course became my anchor, something concrete to focus on when memories threatened to pull me under. I studied late into the night, absorbing information about structural integrity regulations and safety protocols. The technical language felt cleansing somehow, like it was scrubbing away the fog of emotion that had clouded my judgment for months. At work, I requested projects that would expand my network beyond the design department. I volunteered for interdepartmental initiatives. I spoke up in meetings when I previously would have deferred to more established voices. My supervisor noticed the change. "Whatever sparked this transformation, keep it burning," she said during my performance review. "You've always had talent, but now you have drive." I reconnected with former colleagues who had moved to other firms. Coffee meetings turned into professional lunches. Casual conversations revealed industry gossip, including whispers about Elias's rapid ascension through the Caldwell's connections. "He's secured financing for his own firm," Julian from marketing told me. "Rumor has it the Caldwells are backing him completely. Howard Caldwell introduced him to the Vandermeers personally." "Have the Caldwells actually invested yet?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Julian shrugged. "Not that I've heard, but everyone knows they're loaded, old money from shipping or something." That evening, I dug deeper into the Caldwell family finances. Public records revealed a pattern of leveraged assets and strategic bankruptcy filings dating back 15 years. Howard Caldwell had been named in at least 3 lawsuits from investors, claiming misrepresentation of assets. Each case had been settled privately, the records sealed. Their primary residence had changed 4 times in 6 years, always moving to slightly less prestigious addresses while maintaining the appearance of upgrading. Most tellingly, their charitable foundation, the one prominently displayed on Society, Pages, had contributed minimal actual funds to its stated causes. Instead, it hosted lavish fundraising galas where the Caldwells were photographed with influential figures, creating an impression of philanthropy without substantial financial commitment. The picture becoming clearer with each piece of information. The Caldwells were sophisticated financial illusionists. They maintained appearances through strategic social connections and carefully managed impressions rather than actual wealth. And Elias, so eager to believe in their promised backing, had bet his professional future on their empty assurances. I quietly corrected the flaws in his designs that I'd discovered, documenting my work meticulously and dating each correction. Not out of lingering devotion, but as insurance, proof that I'd recognized the issues long before anyone else. I kept both the originals and my corrected versions safely stored in a secure cloud account. The most unexpected development came 3 months into my transformation. I was attending a lecture on sustainable urban design when I spotted Maxwell Werner in the audience, Elias's former mentor and the most respected architect in the city. During the networking reception afterward, I gathered my courage and approached him. "Mr. Werner," I said, extending my hand. "Zarina Khalid. I believe we met briefly at the Urban Development Awards last year." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Ah, yes. You were with Elias Harrington, if I recall." "I was," I acknowledged without emotion. "I'm with Meridian Design now, transitioning into compliance and regulatory oversight." Rather than offering pity or awkward condolences about my broken engagement, Maxwell surprised me with genuine interest in my professional evolution. "Compliance is the backbone of innovation," he said. "Too many young architects see regulations as constraints rather than foundations for creativity." Our conversation flowed naturally from building codes to his current projects. When he mentioned his concerns about recent industry standards for sustainable materials, I suggested improved oversight protocols I'd been studying. "Mind if I send you some research on this?" I offered. "I've been developing a compliance framework that might address your concerns." 3 days later, we met for coffee to discuss my proposal. The meeting evolved into a professional consultation, then a series of informal advisory sessions. Maxwell's respect for my analytical abilities was evident in the way he incorporated my suggestions into his firm's practices. By the 4th meeting, he was confiding his frustrations with the industry. "There's too much emphasis on flash over substance these days," he said, stirring his coffee. Too many young stars rising without proper foundation, relying on connections, rather than craft. Like Elias Harrington? I couldn't help asking. Maxwell studied me carefully. He has talent. But yes, I worry about his new venture. The Caldwells have opened doors for him, but doors can close just as quickly in this business. Have you seen his recent designs? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Not in detail. He's keeping them close until the official unveiling. That's partly why I'm concerned. Maxwell leaned forward. Listen, Zarina, my compliance director is taking maternity leave next month. I need someone who understands both the creative and regulatory sides of the business. Would you be interested in a temporary consulting position? The opportunity was perfect, better than anything I could have engineered. I would be honored, I said, meaning every word. 2 weeks later, I started my consulting role at Werner Architecture. My new office overlooked the downtown skyline, including the site where Elias's arts complex would soon break ground. Every morning, I arrived early to review project submissions and compliance reports. Every evening, I stayed late, absorbing information about the firm's projects and client relationships. Maxwell recognized my dedication and began inviting me to client meetings. Your perspective adds value, he explained. You see potential issues others miss. My professional rebirth was nearly complete when I received an invitation to the groundbreaking ceremony for the downtown arts complex. It wasn't addressed to me personally. It was a mass invitation to Werner Architecture as a courtesy to industry leaders. Maxwell mentioned it casually during our weekly review. Will you attend? He asked, watching my reaction carefully. Of course, I replied with a professional smile. It's an important project for the city. It will be Elias's first major groundbreaking as lead architect, Maxwell observed. The Vandermeers are quite impressed with his concepts. As they should be, I said. His creative vision has always been exceptional. What I didn't say was that I had seen the preliminary drafts of those concepts months ago. I knew exactly where the structural weaknesses would be if no one had caught them during final reviews. I knew precisely which questions to ask if given the opportunity. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for exactly 2 weeks before Elias and Vivian's engagement party, the event they had planned for what would have been my wedding day. The timing felt like cosmic alignment, a chance to set in motion the final phase of my transformation. I purchased a new dress for the occasion, a deep blue sheath that conveyed professional confidence rather than seeking attention. I scheduled a haircut that shaped my longer locks into a sleek, sophisticated style. I practiced my professional smile in the mirror until it revealed nothing of the satisfaction burning inside me. Zarina Khalid, I told my reflection the morning of the ceremony. Compliance consultant with Werner Architecture, respected industry professional, not Elias Harrington's ex-fiancé. Maxwell picked me up in his company car, briefing me on expected attendees during the drive. The mayor will speak first, then Howard Caldwell as the primary investor, followed by Elias for the technical presentation. The Vandermeers will be front row center. They've committed $30 million to the project once construction begins. Has the Caldwell investment been formalized? I asked innocently. Maxwell glanced at me curiously. The announcement is expected today. Why do you ask? I smiled. Just curious about the financing structure. It seems like an ambitious project for a new firm. As we pulled up to the ceremony site, I caught sight of Elias in an expensive suit, standing beside Vivian in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. They were posing for photographs with Howard Caldwell and the mayor, all smiles and handshakes. Elias's expression flickered when he spotted me walking beside Maxwell. Confusion, then recognition, then something like alarm passed across his face before he composed himself. Vivienne whispered something in his ear, her eyes fixed on me with calculation rather than concern. I smiled politely in their direction and turned my attention to the other attendees. Maxwell introduced me to city officials and industry leaders as the brightest compliance mind in the business. Each introduction built my professional credibility in the very circle where Elias had once told me I didn't belong. The ceremony began with speeches praising innovation and community vision. When Elias took the podium to present the architectural concept, I listened attentively, noting the confidence in his voice as he described features I recognized from his earlier drafts, including elements where I had identified potential structural issues. During the question period, I raised my hand. Maxwell looked surprised but nodded encouragingly. The mayor recognized me, and suddenly all eyes turned in my direction. Zarina Khalid, compliance consultant with Werner Architecture, I introduced myself, watching Elias's knuckles whiten around the edges of the podium. I'm curious about the cantilevered section over the main entrance. Given the materials specified, and our city's wind load requirements, has your team conducted stress testing for sustained gale force conditions? The question was precisely targeted. Professional enough to be appropriate for the setting, specific enough to demonstrate knowledge of his design, and focused on an area where I knew his original calculations had been flawed. Elias hesitated, just long enough for concern to register on the faces of the investors in the front row. We've conducted comprehensive testing for all weather conditions, he said, his voice slightly strained. The design exceeds all regulatory requirements. I nodded, pleasantly. Wonderful to hear. The concept is truly visionary. As I sat down, Maxwell leaned toward me. Excellent question. Very few people would have identified that potential issue. Just doing my job, I replied, feeling Vivian's eyes burning into the back of my head. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled at the reception, Elias maneuvered through the crowd toward me. 5 months had passed since I'd stood close enough to smell his cologne. A new one, more expensive than what he'd worn when we were together. "Zarina," he said, his voice a careful blend of professional courtesy and wariness. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Professional courtesy," I explained, gesturing to Maxwell across the room. "I'm consulting with Werner Architecture now." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Compliance suits you. You always had an eye for detail." "Thank you," I said, my voice pleasant but reserved. "Congratulations on the project. It's quite an accomplishment." "We should catch up sometime," he offered, though his eyes darted toward Vivian, who was watching our interaction with barely concealed concern. "Perhaps after the engagement party," I suggested. "I received the invitation. Very thoughtful of you to include me." The color drained slightly from his face. That was Vivian's doing. A gesture of goodwill. "How considerate," I said, raising my glass slightly. "To new beginnings, then." As I walked away, I felt his eyes following me, no longer seeing the devastated woman he'd left behind, but someone new, someone who had emerged from those ashes with purpose and precision. An anonymous tip led building inspectors to review Elias's projects just as he was preparing to launch his new firm. I delivered the information myself, not through a dramatic confrontation or public accusation, but through a carefully worded email to the city's chief building inspector from an untraceable account. The message detailed potential compliance, issues in the arts complex design, citing specific sections of the building code, and referencing the preliminary plans that had been filed with the city. The timing was perfect. 3 days after the groundbreaking ceremony, inspectors requested additional documentation from Elias's firm. The Vandermeer Group, always cautious with their investments, delayed signing the final financing agreement until the review was complete. Howard Caldwell assured everyone publicly that this was a routine procedural matter, but I saw the tension in his smile at industry events. Meanwhile, I cultivated my relationship with Maxwell Werner. My temporary consulting position had evolved into something more permanent, as he recognized the value I brought to his firm. "Your attention to detail has saved us from at least 3 potential compliance issues this month alone," he told me during a project review. "I'd like to discuss making you our full-time compliance director when Amanda's maternity leave ends." I accepted the promotion with gracious professionalism, never letting on how perfectly it aligned with my plans. My new position gave me access to projects across the city, including internal reports about the arts complex inspection. The findings weren't catastrophic. Elias had corrected many of the flaws I'd identified in his early designs, but they were concerning enough to warrant additional scrutiny and delays. Social media showed the strain beginning to appear in Elias and Vivian's perfect world. His posts became less frequent, the captions more strained in their optimism. Minor setbacks only fuel greater comebacks, he wrote beneath a photo of himself working late at his drafting table. Vivian's carefully curated images still depicted a glamorous lifestyle, but eagle-eyed observers noticed she'd begun re-wearing designer outfits and accessories, a subtle but telling sign for someone who had previously never appeared in the same ensemble twice. The whispers started small. At a charity auction, I overheard two developers discussing the Caldwells. Howard promised a substantial donation to the Children's Hospital expansion last year, one said. The pledge remains unfulfilled. Something about reallocating priorities. The other man nodded knowingly. The Meridian Tower project, too. They were supposed to be primary investors, then quietly backed out before the first financing deadline. I sipped my champagne, saying nothing but storing the information. Each piece confirmed what I already knew. The foundation beneath Elias and the Caldwells was cracking under pressure. The real breakthrough came during a regulatory compliance conference, where I was invited to speak about sustainable building materials. After my presentation, a silver-haired man approached me, introducing himself as Theodore Blackwell from the UAE Securities and Exchange Commission. "Impressive presentation, Ms. Khalid," he said, handing me his card. "Your emphasis on verification protocols caught my attention. We're currently reviewing several investment ventures in the architectural sector. Perhaps we could discuss your insights further." Our subsequent lunch meeting revealed that the SEC had been investigating Howard Caldwell for months, following a pattern of investment practices that bordered on fraudulent. "Nothing I can officially confirm," Blackwell said carefully, "but we're particularly interested in ventures where the Caldwells have promised substantial backing without formalized agreements." I provided only factual information, dates of public announcements, names mentioned at industry events, timelines of projects where I had professional knowledge. No accusations, no emotional language, just cold, precise data points that painted a clear picture when connected. 2 weeks later, the Vandermeers withdrew completely from the Arts Complex project, citing irreconcilable differences regarding financial structures. The announcement came one day before Elias and Vivian's engagement party. I attended the party with Maxwell as my +1, wearing an emerald silk dress that complemented my newly confident posture. The venue was lavish, a historic mansion, with manicured gardens, but the atmosphere felt strained. There were noticeable gaps in the crowd where prominent names should have been. The Vandermeers, unsurprisingly, were absent. So were several other investors Elias had been courting. Vivian maintained a perfect smile as she greeted guests, but her eyes held a brittle quality I recognized from my own mirror months earlier. Howard Caldwell circulated with forced joviality, his handshake a little too firm, his laughter a little too loud. When the champagne toast came, his speech about exciting new partnerships rang hollow against the backdrop of recent developments. Elias seemed almost relieved when he spotted me. He disengaged from a conversation with increasingly disinterested potential clients and made his way toward me. "You look well," he said, the compliment genuine despite the tension around his eyes. "The Werner firm clearly agrees with you." "It does," I acknowledged. "Compliance work provides a certain clarity. Everything is either up to code or it isn't. No gray areas." Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, that my words carried double meaning. "I could use some of that clarity lately," he admitted, lowering his voice. "The arts complex has hit some unexpected complications." "I heard about the Vandermeers," I said, my tone professionally sympathetic. "Unfortunate timing." "A temporary setback," he insisted, though his eyes darted toward Howard Caldwell, who was now engaged in what appeared to be a heated, whispered exchange with Vivian. "Other investors are interested." "I'm sure they are," I said, meaning the opposite. As the evening progressed, I watched the dynamic between Elias and the Caldwells shift subtly. Howard pulled him into a side room for a conversation that left Elias looking pale. Vivian's perfect hostess smile slipped when she thought no one was watching. By the time Maxwell and I departed, the celebration had taken on the quality of a wake. 3 days later, the Securities and Exchange Commission announced a formal investigation into Howard Caldwell's investment practices. The news hit the architectural community like a bombshell with immediate ripple effects. Elias's firm, having been so publicly linked to Caldwell financing, faced a crisis of confidence. Clients began withdrawing projects. Contractors requested additional financial guarantees. I watched it unfold with detached fascination, never intervening directly but always positioned to observe. In professional settings, I maintained appropriate concern about industry stability. In private, I allowed myself the cold satisfaction of seeing the inevitable consequences of their choices materialize. The most revealing moment came 6 weeks after the engagement party. Vivian's social media accounts went suddenly silent. No more glamorous event photos, no more engagement planning updates. Elias's professional page still functioned but made no mention of her or the Caldwells. Industry gossip confirmed what I had anticipated. Vivian had ended their engagement when the SEC investigation threatened to envelop her father's remaining assets. "She's in Europe with friends," Julian told me over lunch, always eager to share the latest scandal. Left him holding the bag with creditors and angry clients. The Caldwells never actually signed any formal investment agreements, just promises and handshakes. "How unfortunate," I murmured, spreading butter on my bread with steady hands. "Did he have any backup financing?" "No. He bet everything on their backing. The firm's practically insolvent now." Julian leaned forward conspiratorially. "Word is he's trying to salvage his career by approaching his old connections." One of those connections, I knew, would inevitably be Maxwell Werner. As Elias's former mentor, Maxwell represented perhaps his last chance at professional rehabilitation. I had anticipated this move months ago, positioning myself accordingly. When Maxwell mentioned Elias's name during our weekly planning meeting, I maintained perfect composure. "He's requested a meeting," Maxwell said, watching me carefully. "Given the circumstances with the Caldwells, he's seeking advisory support on completing his existing projects." "Understandable," I replied, my voice neutral. "His design vision has always been exceptional, regardless of his current difficulties." Maxwell seemed relieved by my response. "I was concerned about potential awkwardness, given your history." "That was a personal matter, long resolved," I assured him. "Professional considerations should remain separate." He nodded appreciatively. "I value that perspective, Zarina. Would you be willing to join the meeting? Your compliance expertise would be relevant to his situation." "Of course," I said, as if the request hadn't been precisely what I'd been orchestrating for months. "I'm happy to provide whatever assistance would benefit the firm." The meeting was scheduled for the following week. As the date approached, I prepared methodically, reviewing Elias's projects, identifying salvageable elements, compiling a list of regulatory considerations that would need to be addressed. I selected my outfit with the same precision, a tailored, navy suit that conveyed authority without ostentation. The night before the meeting, I removed the engagement ring from its velvet box for the last time. I studied it in the lamplight, remembering how it had once represented my future, then my loss, then my pain. Now it represented nothing but a closed chapter. I placed it in a small envelope addressed to Elias's office with a simple note: "For whatever debts need clearing." The following morning, I mailed it on my way to work, closing that circle permanently. Maxwell and I were already seated in the conference room when Elias arrived. He looked thinner than at the engagement party, with new lines etched around his mouth. His expensive suit hung slightly loose, as if tailored for a more confident version of himself. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said, his eyes lingering on me with something like disbelief. "I appreciate the opportunity to discuss potential collaboration." In that moment, seeing him diminished but still grasping at professional salvation, I felt an unexpected emotion. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but something closer to peace. The man before me was just that, a man, flawed and human, no longer holding any power over my happiness or self-worth. Maxwell outlined the agenda while Elias arranged his portfolio on the table. "Before we begin," Maxwell said, "I want to clarify that Zarina is our compliance director now. Any projects we discuss would require her approval regarding regulatory standards." Elias glanced at me, a complex emotion crossing his face. "Congratulations," he said, the word sincere despite everything. "That's quite an achievement." "Thank you," I replied evenly. Shall we begin with the arts complex situation? I understand there are significant challenges to address. The conference room fell silent when Elias walked in and saw me sitting beside Maxwell. The shock in his eyes was quickly masked by professional composure, but his hands trembled slightly as he laid out his portfolio. I maintained perfect poise, my expression revealing nothing of the satisfaction I felt seeing him struggle to process my presence. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said after Maxwell's introduction. "Zarina is integral to our compliance department now," Maxwell explained. "Any project we discuss would require her approval regarding regulatory standards." Elias nodded, his expression unreadable. "Congratulations," he said to me, the words sincere despite everything. "That's quite an achievement." "Thank you," I replied evenly. "Shall we begin with the arts complex situation? I understand there are significant challenges to address." For the next hour, Elias presented his situation with remarkable candor. The Caldwell's financial backing had evaporated completely when the SEC investigation intensified. Vivienne had ended their engagement via email from Milan, citing unfortunate circumstances beyond her control and the need to support her family through difficult times. Clients had withdrawn projects, contractors demanded immediate payment, and his fledgling firm faced bankruptcy. "I've secured a few smaller projects to maintain operations," he explained, "but nothing substantial enough to rebuild. What I need is a partnership with an established firm like Werner Architecture to complete the arts complex." Maxwell asked pertinent questions about contracts and liabilities. I focused on technical details, reviewing design specifications and compliance requirements. My questions were precise, professional, and devastatingly thorough, exposing every weakness in his plans without a hint of personal animosity. When Maxwell excused himself to take an urgent call, Elias and I were left alone in the conference room. The silence stretched between us until he finally spoke. "You've changed," he said quietly. "People do," I replied, organizing my notes without looking up. "I deserve this, don't I?" His voice carried no self-pity, just resignation. "Finding you here, in the position to determine whether I salvage my career or not." I met his gaze directly. "This isn't about what you deserve, Elias. It's about professional considerations and regulatory compliance. Nothing more." "Is it?" He leaned forward. "I received the ring yesterday. For whatever debts need clearing." "That was cold, Zarina, even under the circumstances." "It was practical," I corrected him. "The ring holds no significance to me now, but its monetary value might help with your current financial situation. Consider it a professional courtesy." His face flushed. "I don't need charity." "No, you need a compliance director to approve your designs and a reputable firm to support your projects," I stated flatly. "Whether that happens depends entirely on the technical merits of your work, not on our history." When Maxwell returned, he brought surprising news. The Vandermeer Group has expressed renewed interest in the arts complex, provided certain conditions are met. Specifically, they want Werner Architecture to oversee compliance and execution. Elias's expression brightened instantly. "That would solve everything. The project could proceed with proper backing, and my firm would receive design credit." "With significant oversight," I interjected. "Every aspect would require rigorous verification. Your role would be creative, not executive." "I understand," he said, looking directly at me. "I'm willing to accept whatever conditions are necessary." Maxwell glanced between us, sensing the undercurrents. "I'll need to discuss this with the partners. In the meantime, Zarina will conduct a comprehensive review of the existing designs to identify any compliance issues." After Elias left, Maxwell turned to me. "Are you comfortable with this arrangement? I can assign another compliance officer if there's any personal conflict." "There's no conflict," I assured him. "My professional judgment isn't influenced by past relationships." That evening, alone in my apartment, I reviewed Elias's portfolio in detail. His designs were still brilliant, creative, innovative, pushing boundaries. But now I could see the flaws that his ambition had blinded him to. Structural elements that prioritized aesthetics over stability, materials selected for visual impact rather than longevity, Spaces conceived for impression rather than function. I marked each issue methodically, attaching regulatory citations and suggested corrections. The work was exhaustive, creating a document that both exposed the weaknesses and provided pathways to resolution. It was not vindictive. It was thorough, fair, and irrefutable. 2 days later, when Elias returned for our follow-up meeting, Maxwell was running late again. As we waited, Elias studied me with new awareness. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about professional considerations being separate from personal history." I nodded, waiting. "That day at the cafe, when I said our relationship was holding me back professionally," he continued, "that was cruel and untrue. The opposite was actually the case. You supported my work more than anyone. You saw potential where others didn't. Including the flaws in your designs that could have compromised client safety," I said quietly. His eyes widened. "You knew?" I slid a folder across the table containing copies of his flawed designs, marked with corrections in my handwriting. Corrections dated months before our breakup. "I could have destroyed you completely," I told him, my voice steady. "I knew about the problems before you left. I could have exposed everything immediately and watched you fall. Instead, I gave you time to destroy yourself." He stared at the evidence in stunned silence, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The anonymous tip to building inspectors, the SEC investigation timing, you were behind it all." "I simply provided factual information to the appropriate authorities," I stated. "The consequences arose from your own choices and the Caldwell's fraudulent practices." "Why show me this now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Because your designs will be approved," I replied. "With my corrections implemented, they meet all regulatory requirements. Werner Architecture will partner on the arts complex, with you receiving appropriate design credit. Your career will survive, though not in the form you imagined." His shoulders sagged with relief, then tension. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing," I said simply. "This isn't a negotiation or revenge, it's simply business." Maxwell arrived then, bringing contracts and partnership agreements. As we reviewed the terms, Elias's role became clear. He would retain design input, but surrender executive control. His creative vision would be preserved while authority shifted to Werner Architecture, specifically to its compliance department. "You'll report directly to Zarina for all technical approvals," Maxwell explained. "Her sign-off will be required at every stage." Elias nodded, accepting the hierarchy without objection. "I understand." 1 year later, Elias works at a desk visible from my office window. Every innovation he suggests requires my signature. Every design he creates passes through my hands for final approval. The power dynamic is completely reversed. He lives in the shadow of what could have been, and I live in the sunlight of what I've become. The Arts Complex project progresses under my careful oversight. Elias contributes valuable creative concepts within the strict parameters I establish. His reputation has partially recovered, though the whispers about his association with the Caldwells linger in industry circles. Vivian occasionally appears in society pages, always with different companions, her family's legal troubles carefully unmentioned. Sometimes, when Elias submits designs for my approval, our fingers almost touch across the desk. In those moments, I see recognition in his eyes, not of the woman who once loved him unconditionally, but of the woman who rose from those ashes. The woman who holds his professional fate in her hands not out of vengeance, but because she earned the right through competence and resilience. Last week, he stopped by my office after hours, a rare occurrence in our carefully maintained professional relationship. He placed a small package on my desk. "What's this?" I asked, not reaching for. "It had your ring," he said. "I couldn't sell it. It never felt right." "I don't want it back," I told him. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted you to know I kept it as a reminder of the worst mistake I ever made. Not losing the ring, but losing you." I looked at him steadily. "I'm not lost. Elias, I'm precisely where I should be." He nodded, understanding the finality in my tone. "The Westbrook expansion designs are ready for your review. When you have time. I'll look at them tomorrow, I promised. After he left, I remained at my desk, watching the city lights flicker on across the skyline. The package sat untouched, no longer representing heartbreak or revenge, but simply a closed chapter. I would return it to him tomorrow with a note suggesting he donate it to the Children's Hospital charity auction. That evening, as I drove home along the coastal road to my new beachfront apartment, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, devastated, hollowed out, believing her worth was tied to a man's approval. That woman was truly gone, reborn through her own determination and intelligence. The woman who emerged, who held authority not through manipulation or connection, but through earned respect and demonstrated competence, was stronger than I could have imagined. Not because she orchestrated another's downfall, but because she rebuilt herself more completely than any architectural project. I parked in my designated space and took the elevator to the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the perfect ocean view I'd always wanted. My phone buzzed with an email notification. The board of directors had unanimously approved my promotion to Executive Director of Compliance and Quality Assurance, effective immediately. I smiled at the news, knowing I had earned every step of this ascent through my own merit. Elias might always carry the weight of his mistakes, forever working in the shadow of what he'd lost. But I had discovered something far more valuable than revenge, the knowledge that I was never what he discarded. I was what he failed to recognize, a force of nature, contained in human form, finally unleashed to her full potential.